Thank you and good evening for joining in this most important topic of conversation tonight. We will be going over the draft policy on the use of force with the Vallejo Police Department. And this is really your opportunity to weigh in on the languaging and the particulars of the policy before it's finalized. And we really appreciate and honor the comment you're making this evening. With that, I'd like to turn the meeting over to our Chief Shawnee Williams for his opening remarks.
Kelly, thank you very much for that introduction. First and foremost, I would like to thank our guests and residents who have joined us tonight. Your participation and input and feedback are invaluable and essential towards our progress. I would like to thank our volunteers, our facilitators, our moderator, and the Department of Justice for their contribution as well. And finally, I would like to thank the amazing women and men of the Vallejo Police Department who work extraordinarily hard with limited resources to keep us all safe. Your servant leadership is deeply appreciated and respected. In the book, Extreme Ownership, the author has a line which I believe reflects the current reality of BPD. He says this: "You have done so much with so little for so long, I believe you can do almost anything." So BPD, I'm extremely thankful, sincerely thankful for the unprecedented work you all do on a daily basis. Over the past 2 years, the Vallejo Police Department has embarked upon one of the most ambitious audit and evaluation processes that our department has ever seen. The resounding calls for equity in policing have propelled law enforcement agencies across the nation into a position of deep reflection, assessment, and correction to better serve our communities from a place of understanding, accountability, transparency, and inclusion. The Office of the Chief takes on the great responsibility of setting this foundation by establishing a process by which progress can be achieved. When I was sworn in as police chief, our community wanted change. Change is difficult, growth is necessary, and failure is not an option for our community or our department. We know at BPD, transformational change during a global pandemic is no easy task. We embrace this opportunity to change, to progress, to serve our community with the consistent understanding that the preservation of life and the sanctity of life are the cornerstones of effective public safety and service to our community. Tonight, you will hear about our commitment to provide excellence through professional service. We need your input into how we can police Vallejo, and your feedback about the use of force policy is at the center of this discussion. This is one of the most pivotal issues in our country. Our goal is to listen to you tonight, learn and improve our policy practices. Our goal is also to increase transparency and to build public trust through changes in our policies that keep our residents and department members safe. Again, thank you for your participation, and your partnership in this endeavor is essential to our progress. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Chief Shawnee Williams, for your remarks this evening. We look forward to hearing more from you later. At this time, we'd like to go over the code of conduct that we would like to manage this meeting with. Zoom does have its particular challenges, so if everyone, once you get into your breakout room, could follow the ideas that we're going to discuss right now. First and foremost, we are all in this together. Let's treat everyone courteously. We don't have to agree. We can agree to disagree, but let's do it with courtesy and kindness. Please listen to others respectfully and exercise self-control. If you find yourself talking over others, please take a moment and step back. Everyone's ideas and input are important. Please give open-minded consideration to all viewpoints. As I said, we don't need to agree on all things, but we do have a common goal in mind, and that's to have the best policy directives possible for the safety and welfare of our community. Focus on the issues and avoid personalizing debate. This is a time for ideas to come forward that may need to be included in the policy, or things may need to be struck from the policy, and it's your time to make those comments. Embrace respectful disagreement and dissent as part of the democratic rights that are inherent components of an inclusive public process and tools for forging sound decisions. more minds make better decisions. Please refrain from personal attacks on others. And please know, failure to adhere to any of these courtesy expectations may result in dismissal from the meeting. We are here for a specific purpose, and that's to discuss the use of force policy. If you have other questions, there will be opportunities to pose those either at the end of this meeting, and if we can't get to them because of time constraints, then we will be taking questions and noting them and coming back to them in future discussions. Again, thank you for your consideration of this code of conduct, and let's have a fair, focused, and positive conversation. Thank you. Next, we're going to go through a video that gives an overview of the use of force policy. It'll be summarized by Lieutenant Ramraka. Lieutenant Ramraka, the floor is yours.
Oh wait, you mean the link?
Yeah. Go ahead and play the video. Thank you.
There you got it.
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Sanjay Ramraka of the Vallejo Police Department. I serve as the department's subject matter expert in force options, tactics, and de-escalation. I'm here to provide a summary of the proposed changes to the use of force policy.
Yeah, no, for sure.
In August of 2019, the City of Vallejo commissioned the OIR group to conduct an independent assessment of the police department, which came on the heels of fatal officer-involved shootings, strained police public relationships that prompted public concern and protest. In May of 2020, the OIR group completed their assessment, which included recommendations to put VPD's operational approaches into a larger context of best practices and police reforms. In June of 2020, the Vallejo Police Department entered into a 3-year collaborative reform agreement with the California Department of Justice to review the policies, practices, and procedures of all aspects of VPD operations. I will discuss the following major changes to the draft version of this policy. The policy outlines the Vallejo Police Department's values and standards applied to ensure force is used judiciously and with paramount concern for dignity and life. The emphasis, and which has always been our paramount concern, is that officers shall use deadly force only when necessary in defense of human life. In determining whether deadly force is necessary, officers shall evaluate each situation in light of the particular circumstances of each case and shall use other available resources and techniques, if reasonably safe and feasible to an objectively reasonable officer. Policy further requires officers to monitor, evaluate, and carefully balance all interests when making use of force decisions in a professional, impartial, and reasonable manner. The impetus for this draft policy change is to improve policing outcomes, with the ultimate goal of sustaining trust, confidence, and legitimacy within our community. The proposed changes expanded the depth and breadth of the policy, adding layers of review, greater accountability, and redefining force in some instances. The policy centers around departmental values, which include the sanctity of life, harm reduction, de-escalation, and accountability. Departmental values highlight the sanctity of life, dignity of all persons, human rights, and respect. Throughout the draft, these values repeatedly appear to emphasize to all members the importance of the individual prior to making the decision to use force. We will also discuss the expectation for our officers to use a critical decision-making model that focuses on integrating communication, situational assessment, and sound tactics, illustrated further toward the end of this presentation. The principle of de-escalation prior to and during any force usage is to be at the forefront of any potential force encounter. The recognition that a situation can and should be de-escalated whenever feasible will lead to less use of force, greater connection with individuals as human beings, the ideals that every life is important, and the sanctity of life are at the forefront of every encounter. The emphasis is on the reduction in injuries to both officers and citizens. This policy further discusses the affirmative duty, whenever feasible, to attempt to slow down using time, distance, and cover to reduce the intensity of any situation. The goal of de-escalation is to gain the voluntary compliance of subjects when applicable, and thereby reduce or eliminate the necessity to use physical force. The policy further directs that officers do not unnecessarily escalate an encounter or create a need for force. Where feasible, officers must take action to attempt to stabilize the situation and reduce the immediacy and severity of the threat, with the goal of allowing for more time, options, and resources to resolve the situation. Increased accountability and reporting from the officer using force, witnessing officers, and supervisors will create faster review, reduce complaints, and inform training and tactics. This process not only checks the reasonableness of force and policy compliance, but all the actions that lead up to any use of force, whether de-escalation was feasible and whether the force was necessary at all. The improvements are aimed at better accountability structures from every level of the department. Major changes to the firearm policy section include a policy prohibition for shooting at or from moving vehicles. These changes reflect the growing sentiment of the ineffectiveness of the tactic and the negative downstream effects that could result in the form of ricochets, striking uninvolved subjects within and outside the vehicle, and vehicle collisions. The mere pointing of a firearm is now considered reportable, changing years of past practice. In the biggest change, exhibiting firearms is prohibited unless reasonable belief exists deadly force may be necessary. This exhibition includes drawing the firearm from one's holster without pointing it at anyone or anything. New sections previously unaddressed, but reflecting the need for expanded policy language include encounters with children, vulnerable populations, armed but unresponsive subjects, planned tactical responses, the medical condition known as excited delirium, and defining the levels of resistance. The draft policy stresses that officers have an affirmative duty to intervene when they are present and witness another officer using force that is clearly beyond that which is reasonably objective or unlawful under the circumstances. Officers shall intercede to prevent the unreasonable use of force, and with the new language, officers will now be subject to potential discipline under VPD policy if the officer failed to intervene. The policy also highlights the importance of reporting any excessive use of force. The California Peace Officers Standards and Training Commission has banned the training of carotid restraint, and as a result, carotid and chokeholds are prohibited. This was due to a change in state law. The need for greater oversight and accountability have increased reporting to supervisors in multiple instances, which included the following: the discharge or pointing of a firearm, an individual rendered unconscious, the application of less than lethal munitions, any use of a taser or control device, the use of OC or any other chemical agent, the use of a restraint device other than handcuffs, the deployment of any canine, any use of force causing a visible injury or a subject requiring medical treatment, a complaint of injury or continuing pain, any firearm discharge that resulted in injury or death of an animal, any allegation of excessive force, an observation by another officer when using unnecessary force. And whereby no specific responsibilities for supervisors were delineated in previous policy language, they must now respond in very specific ways. The critical decision-making model is a snapshot into the expectation of our officers to continually assess and balance risks. A further belief is that our officers will slow down when feasible and appropriate to collect information, balance risks, assess options, and consider law and policy into the confines of that particular situation. Specialized police tactical units, such as SWAT, have employed the critical thinking and decision-making processes contained in the CDM as a guide for years, and this is our effort at incorporating those best practices. The decision-making model is about leveraging time, distance, and cover if and when feasible, while looking for additional options. In closing, the changes in this draft policy highlight the values of the Vallejo Police Department, the recognition of societal interest to not have police dispense force as a first option, increased scrutiny and accountability. Moving forward, further review by additional stakeholders is necessary and warranted. A final version of this policy will be determined in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you found the breakout or the video constructive and a good use of a way to give you more information about the policy itself.
This is a great, great, great meeting.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, to the main room. We had a very robust conversation in our room, and so I want to welcome everybody back, and I'm going to turn the floor back over to Shelley and Kristen.
Thank you, now we're going to hear back from each of the breakout groups. Would the scribe please prepare to read back the main points, and then if the facilitator has additional comments, we want to keep this conversation to about 45 minutes total so that there's time for a question and answer with the chief at about 7:45. So if you could time your comments accordingly. So let's start with group one. Who is group one?
Oh, that would be me.
Hello, Pastor Brown.
Hi. So, first of all, we had to figure out all of our favorite cartoon characters. We had to put them out. That's all. So then we were talking about what we really wanted to know was who read the policy of our group, who really read the policy, and not everybody read the policy, but they were concerned that the policy needed to be followed. Okay, and they wanted to make sure that everybody's feet was held to the fire, from the officer to the supervisors to the chief to the whole department. They want to make sure that the policy is not only written but understood and is enforced. Question two was, what was your concern? What is your concern about the policy? They wanted to make sure that the officers were trained and understood the policy. And then Charles said, you know, he wanted the muscle memory, you know, to practice it and practice and practice this, and a lot of training, so they will react to the to whatever happens, and they're able to perform under duress. Philip is wanted to make sure when the policy is violated, is there actually any kind of repercussions? What really will happen? Will it just be swept under the rug? Will the people not hear the truth? Will the public know about there was a violation of policy? They want to make sure that the police is being held accountable. So every time a weapon is drawn and is used, or a violation of physical force, will the public know about it? And then that was basically what everybody wanted to make sure. People are uncomfortable because a policy is not enforced, and will this policy actually be enforced? It's well written, but will it actually, the words are good, but it has to follow up with actions by the officers. And if the officers use the use of force policy, did they stay within the rules that was set forward before them? And if they went outside those rules, are they being held accountable? Will they circle around the wagons, will circle around and protect the officer in the department, or will they really go out and be honest and transparent and held everybody accountable that has to be held accountable? Oh, let's see here. And then who will actually determine? Okay, well, let's see. I think Andrea wanted the chief to be around to answer some questions and have they would feel better about the policy if there was some open town hall questions face to face, not on Zoom, but if we can actually talk and ask and see each other and find out what what the chief has for the citizens. Okay. Third question was, what do you think about this proposed policy? Again, they want like what's going to happen when a gun is drawn. There is a lot of the big policy, and if you read it, there's a lot of answers in there. But again, they really want to make sure that we're used to not having the policy enforced. Will it really be enforced? Like, when is a gun drawn? Who's going to take care of that situation? Who's going to report it? When's it going to be reportable? And if it's drawn in a violation of the policy, what will the consequences be? Okay. Captain Ty answered these questions, and so did the chief. He answered the questions. The policy also was asked about, is it a good policy, or what does a policy look like with other cities? And the chief made sure that everybody knew that the Department of Justice was involved in this policy making. It wasn't just a fly-by-night and written down by some people. They looked at other cities, larger cities, and people that that was already involved in these things, what they do, what they took the best information from these, and Vallejo implemented them for Vallejo. They went even a step further on some of the things the chief can answer. They went further to make sure the policy is enforceable and that there's consequences, and to be transparent. And things like, when will the weapon be pulled out? The different circumstances. When will the weapon be pulled out? And it's right there in the policy. Let's see. One person wanted to know who will make the determination to draw the weapon. Okay, is again, it's in the policy, and it's going to be an officer decision at that second. Is he going to violate that policy, or is he going to worry about, is there going to be a concern of life for his or someone else? There's a lot more to it, but the chief answered that question.
If you could wrap it up in the next minute, that would be great.
The last question was, how do you think this policy could be improved to make it enforced? Let the people see it being enforced. Let people see that. Know the policy. I think if citizens know the policy, they would feel better about that too. Okay.
Thank you so much. Group 2.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, so I'm going to try to make it brief. I think one of the ideas that kind of sums up what we were talking about was that transparency and accountability are critical to ethical policing. And without these two factors, the public becomes distrustful and cynical. And I think it was pretty much communicated that some of the folks didn't trust the policies, didn't trust the police. Were actually wondering, why is it that Vallejo police put on a uniform and respond in a way that's not normal? They act like they're better than the citizens. That was a kind of the general consensus. And one of the things for sure is people want more understanding of what, where, and why do things happen. They want that transparency. It was also acknowledged that because of the undermanding of the Vallejo police force, sometimes the communication wasn't there on calls, as officers had to go from call to call to call. So again, to kind of wrap it up, open communication. Again, the chief had stated that that we had 1 year without critical incidents, and someone had made a comment that 1 year wasn't enough, that they wanted to see more. And they also were wondering if the Vallejo police make the policy, who's actually going to enforce it? Is it going to be the same people who are making the policy? They're going to want to be the ones enforcing it. And so I think generally there's still a mistrust of the police.
Thanks, Chaplain.
That's what I gathered.
All right. Group 3.
Hello, thanks, Shelley. So less than half of the room also read the policy. Some of the areas of interest and concern and suggestions, I did join a little late, so if there's anything I missed, Josette, feel free to ping me on it and I'll mention it. However, there were questions around training. So there was interest around what additional training is being required or mandated for officers. A few of those training types that were mentioned were de-escalation trainings, behavioral health training, and others. So there was interest to understand what the training looks like for officers. There was also questions around what is the screening process for new hires, specifically those who have had maybe previous issues with use of force. So there was concern there if that is something that's looked at during the hiring process and how that is factored into hiring considerations. There was also interest around what are the actual police officer views about the policy. So that question came up as well. And around the actual policy implementation, there was question around will it be gradual or is it implemented once the full policy has been approved. So just trying to understand what is the process. It's very long. So is it that a lot of these things need to be reviewed and approved, or is it pieces, or as certain things happen are these policies implemented? And so it was also mentioned that some are implemented as a response to past situations as well. Recommendations included questions around, are there plans to use shot spotters, so gun technology detection, and if there's plans for that. There was mention that there is, and that it also includes, I think, a technology approval process or an approval process altogether. There was also an offer of what can citizens do to help. There was some suggestions there to come forward when there is a crime. There was another mention of the website shortly having the opportunity to hit like a button on there where you can submit information and be unidentifiable. So I think there was funding lost when there was a tip line that used to be available for citizens to call in and give anonymous tips. And so it sounds like there is a solution to fill that gap and should be available on the website in the future. There was also a resource shared for a better way. It was a mental health first aid certification. There was a link that was shared, but I think you can Google it as well and learn more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Group 4.
That's me, Brian Farrell.
Hi, Brian.
First, I want to talk about how inclusive our facilitator was. Everyone was called on a number of times to pose questions or comment on new subjects that came up. I think we quickly got acquainted, and it was a very open and energetic process, and I'm very grateful for that. Some of the things that we discussed include de-escalation training, the frequency of it, and fortunately, our lieutenant, and I apologize, Raka is very knowledgeable about that, and so we're grateful for understanding the frequency with which that topic is a part of training. There was extensive discussion about support and transparency for families after a life has been taken, and we would like a policy that establishes that there will be a liaison person, sworn or non-sworn, who is to be available to the family as they may have needs for death certificates and should be updated on the status of investigations. I think there was general support in our group that when the family does initially meet with the police department, that it's important that they have the discretion to select who will be their support person there so that they feel as comfortable as possible under very difficult circumstances. But we would like all of this memorialized. let's see, there was a good discussion about what some of the factors may be that have contributed to a very substantial decline in use of force and police misconduct claims and no shootings in the last 18 to 20 months. And that was something that was enlightening and very interesting to all of us. There was discussion about who does the investigation of fatal shootings, and is it someone independent? And someone who's a lawyer in our group cited a code section, and it is clear that where someone clearly is unarmed, the Attorney General will now do the shooting investigation, but we didn't get into what the process is where someone is shot and killed who is armed, and that's known to the officers. So anyway, those are some of the key things that we discussed in our group.
Thank you, Brian. And also for recognizing your facilitator, Mr. Nesperos, for his excellent job making it in.
Outstanding.
Group number 5, please.
All right, I think that's me. Excuse me. So our group, it was a really good discussion, and Carlos did super good in facilitating and answering many questions, you know, and asking the right questions. And so what it was brought up in our group is how to evaluate and how was going to be evaluate the escalation of the situation. And if there is the officer, when they have the camera, if he can be, you know, viewed by the public, and so, and then let's see here, if the officer have the a training for mental health, they brought that up, and it was some sort of an answer, but that's a question that it was brought up, yeah, just basically those were the main questions that they were brought up, and so they were concerned, you know, about the safety of the community and also the safety for the officers, because there is being noticed that many people out there, they're, you know, now they're armed, and so basically, you know, that this is going to be for improving what's going on in the community. So that's what I got.
Thank you, Chuck, for your comments. Group number 6.
Hi, Brian Harris, we did group 6. Thank you, Courtney, for facilitating, and Captain Potts doing a great job at answering, fielding questions for us. We spent a lot of time on de-escalation and recognizing the split decisions that officers have to make. Concerns were asked about approving over the next couple of months what would cause any delay in this to be enacted, this use of force policy, what would cause delays to it. Add language to the use of force policy that is racial and equity, through a racial and equity lens, understanding the community that you are policing through a racial and equity lens. De-escalation starts before contact of an individual, and understanding what that means to understand cultural norms. And the word feasible that's used quite a bit in the policy is different to everyone. So just kind of talking that over there. Crisis intervention person, what's the status of a crisis intervention person was asked. How is recruiting going with our police department? And Captain Potts gives information on that. Mustafa asked a great question about the definition of force and what helping to better define that in this policy and what that means, and understanding our community. And then Philip mentioned there should be less focus on just the physical intervention and more on de-escalation, and let not physical intervention be a first choice. And we got a good explanation on the difference between chokeholds and chronic holds. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Harris. That takes us to our final group, Group 7. And it is now 7:22, just for timekeeper's sake.
Shelley, we do not have groups number 7. We only have.
Okay.
Yeah, we had to make a last minute change, Shelley, so we had to collapse one group. So we are done with the summaries.
Excellent. So this gives us more time for some question and answer with Chief Shawnee Williams. And Chief, would you like to make some comments or address any questions that were brought out in the groups that you were with?
Thank you, Shelley. First and foremost, again, I'd like to just thank the public. Your comments are very beneficial. We were here to listen and to get feedback from you. And by the comments, I wrote some notes down on many of the things that were just said. This was really, really good. I would like to address just one thing when we talked about accountability. Accountability is very important to any policy. It's been said that there's nothing worse than having a policy or a law on the books that you don't enforce. And so when we want to create a culture, and that's what we're striving to do, create a culture of accountability. And when you read this policy, there are duties to intercede, there are duties to report, there are accountability measures that are embedded into this policy. So anytime an officer uses force, there's supervision that has to happen, and a supervisor has to respond. There has to be an investigation that has to go up the chain of command. So it's being reviewed at different levels to ensure that the use of the force was within policy. And there's also duties to de-escalate. We have an affirmative duty to de-escalate when feasible. And so there are certain things that are built into this policy that I want all of you to understand when it comes to accountability. I've always said that accountability starts with active supervision, exceptional training, and oversight. So you need all three in order to ensure that we have accountability. But I'll stop there because we are here to listen, and I want to take questions, and I want to open it up for questions from the public.
Shelley, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Davi, can you take Andrea Source question from Andrea Source?
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I had actually two-part question. I think a lot of people here first want to know when we were going to get that update on the Bent Badge report and when we're going to see the Bent Badge report. And I also wanted to know what would be, in your mind, what would be the ideal enforcement of this policy? And what do you think the enforcement of the policy will look like when it's put into practice?
So you had two questions there, Andrea. One of the things I can't comment about an ongoing personnel investigation into the bent badges. I can say when it comes to enforcement of this policy and the implementation of this policy, one of the steps that we need is your input and your feedback. The other is after we get all that feedback, we have to do what we call meet and confer with the union, and they have to give their input into this policy. And what we want is for everyone to have a voice, to everyone to have feedback and input into this policy so that everyone is heard and we produce a policy that's reflective of the Vallejo community. And so that's what we're striving to do.
Thank you, Chief. The next question from Judy Thomas. You have your hand raised?
It's actually from Philip Thomas.
Thank you.
My question is, when is the next meeting? Because I'm currently reading the policy and I've got some questions. And none, I wanted to be able to pose them all at one time. So curious to know when is the next meeting so I can put forth my questions.
That's an excellent question. I believe our next town hall meeting will be in March. We will send that out to the public so that, this meeting will be in person. So that's what we're striving to do. But I believe, I don't have the date. Monica, if you're on the line, you may have that date. It's already scheduled in March.
I do, sir. It's going to be March 30th, and it's going to be at the Filipino Cultural Center off of Amador Street. And we will go ahead and do all the social outlets on that with our PIO.
Thank you, Monica.
You're welcome, sir.
Great. Next question from Mustafa Abdul Hazim.
Thank you, Chief. I was hoping that you would share with us why the Vallejo Police Department doesn't recognize the Vallejo community as a separate entity from the city of Vallejo.
If I understood your question correctly, you said, why doesn't the Vallejo Police Department recognize the Vallejo community separate from the city?
As a separate entity from the city? If you want me to elaborate, I will, but I mean, be a little clearer, I will, but.
So the way I would answer that, Mustafa, is that every community member, every resident, every visitor to our city is important to our city. Our mission as a city, as a police department, is first and foremost the safety of every resident. And also to ensure that the dignity and value of every person is respected. And so I hope that answers your question, but our goal is to provide exceptional service, professional service to everyone that comes into our city.
Chief, that was a very good answer. I really appreciate that. I just like to just say that what I was trying to get across is the fact that I think of myself as an individual. I think of myself as a member of a family, and I also think of myself as a member of a community. As an individual, I work by myself, but as a family, I work with the other members of the family. We support one another. And as a community, a whole 20,000 of us, 120,000 of us work together. And we're all working together, even to the extent that we don't realize it, to do the kinds of things we need to do to make our community safe and prosperous and healthy for everyone. And so I think it's important for the police department to recognize us as a community, not just as individuals, but that somehow figure out a way to do that. And I don't see that the police department does that. And, whenever you speak about us, you speak about us as our community. And I always ask myself, well, when they say our community, what do they mean? I mean, because we thought we were our own community, not the police's community. So I hope that helps. And I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. Philip Wilson.
Good evening. My question was, we're talking about, accountability. A policy is only as good as it is enforced. And, hearing that these things will be investigated through, different change within the department isn't necessarily assuring to most of the community. We've, heard about the badge bending, which was widely known throughout the entire department, which many of these officers are still there. So it kind of shows that there's a culture of not necessarily taking the, exercising true accountability when it comes to bad behavior, we'll say. And then the other thing is, knowing that whole incident was known, like I said, within the department through to city administration. So when you're talking about implementing this policy, it does sound good, and hearing that you want the officers to take accountability for the people around them, their co-workers and whatnot. But how do we know that that's going to be enforced? And then what's the metric that the officers are going to use to step in to, watch their co-workers? What line, what is too far? How will they know when they're supposed to say something? What are we using to measure that?
Thank you, Philip. You know, I will say that we have different levels of accountability within the police department and also within our state. So the state just passed some laws, and one is SB 16. And so it's a duty for us to be transparent if, say, we have something that deals with excessive force, or there's other categories there that has to be, after the investigation is done, if there's a sustained complaint, we have to be transparent with that information. And that includes documents, videos, and things like that. That holds us accountable. Within our county, we also have the major task force. That means that if we have a critical incident, the police department doesn't do the investigation. The district attorney and an outside agency does that investigation. So that's another layer. If there was a critical incident that involved an unarmed person, the Department of Justice is now coming in to do those investigations. So there's different layers of oversight and accountability that are happening now. We also have a professional standards division within the police department, and they conduct internal affairs investigations. And so we take a critical look at different incidents to ensure that we are complying with our policies. So there's just different layers. One of the recommendations from the assessment that we did in 2019 is that we have oversight, like an independent police auditor or police commission. So those things are also happening during these reforms. So this draft policy that you're looking at is another form of us improving our processes and including you in the process, including the public. And so those are just different layers, Phil, of what we're currently doing. And I believe that that's progress, and those are advancements that are moving us in the right direction.
Next, the Williamsons, please.
Yeah, I had brought something up in our break room. I think it was break room 6, I believe. And what I had brought up was the discrepancy between escalating something for a person of color rather than a person of, a white person. I'm just be blunt. I explained in our breakout room that my nephew was involved in a very serious crime here in Glen Cove. And it took 4.5, almost 5 hours before it escalated into a full-out high-speed chase in which officers were shot at. And my nephew deserved to be shot at anyway. But if he had been a person of color, I just feel that the police, the VPD, would have responded a lot more quickly than they did. I don't understand why he was allowed to linger in Glen Cove for 4.5 hours as a felon who'd been in prison 3 times. Are you frozen?
I hear you, Lisa. Is there a question, or would you like me to comment regarding that?
Yeah, my question is, I think that if he would have been a person of color, that there would have been a more rapid response.
So when you look at this use of force policy, it talks about bias. And one of the things that we don't want to have is bias within our policy. So our responses should be consistent. If there's an act of violence occurring, it's to stop the violence. It's to reduce the harm to our community. I'm going to just focus on training. So one of the things that we implemented last year were different levels of training. And if you go on our department website, you'll see that we had procedural justice training. We had fair and impartial policing training, which deals with bias. We had cultural competency training. We had a history of policing class training. And we also had CIT, that's a crisis intervention and de-escalation training that helps us to resolve situations like you're describing. And so I just want our community to understand we're changing our training so that we are we do have that equity lens, that we are looking at our community from a cultural competency lens when we're dealing with different situations.
Thank you, Chief. Joey Carrizales?
Yes, thank you. My basic question is, does or will a more diversified police force help change? I know you mentioned culture earlier. Will help change the culture within the Vallejo Police Department and possibly causing the use of force policy to be more proactive?
I know you probably are getting tired of me talking, so I'm going to have Deputy Chief Ta answer a few questions, and maybe Captain Potts as well.
Chief Williams, you're the chief of police. You have to be held accountable just like anybody else. So you have every right to talk as long as you want. We as citizens want to hear you. We don't want to hear a subordinate. You're the man responsible. The buck stops with you.
Thank you, Joey. And one of the things I like to do is develop my people and give them the opportunity to speak. I will say that Deputy Chief Ta and Captain Potts are highly capable of answering your question, Joey.
Thank you, Chief. I'll take on this question. I think the answer is obviously yes. I mean, as a police department, Joey, we, as every department, strive to be reflective of the community that we work with and that we serve. And so that really puts more emphasis on recruitment, but it also puts emphasis on trying to mold, future police officers. This is a time right now in my 27 years of police work, it's been very challenging for every department to recruit. Things that happen in one part of the country has never really affected other parts of the country as they do today. And so that has been very challenging for all police departments to really encourage and attract good candidates to come to this industry. Additionally, as you guys know, our profession it's not an easy profession. There are a lot of responsibilities and a lot of things that officers really need to know, and there's really no time or expectation for them to really kind of understand right away how to be a very seasoned officer. We have brand new officers that sometimes are very young. They don't have a lot of life experience. They're learning and they're doing the best they can, but they're, like everyone, human, and they will make mistakes. And so that is why with a more diverse working officer kind of regiment that we have folks that come from different parts of the community. They've grown up in different aspects of different cultures. They're more tolerant when they're dealing with folks from other cultures that are not exactly like their own. And then these robust policies are the ones that really help, in my opinion, young officers, because when you're brand new, you want a policy that kind of tells you in detail what you should and should not do, whether it's with use of force, whether it's handling a domestic violence dispute, or whether it's investigating a traffic accident. And so the main thing that I think, just back to your question about diversity, is how our officers are expected to interact with public. And if you're from this area, you work with people, you know certain cultures, it does make it a lot better for the department and for the community. It gels better. So we are making efforts to recruit women. We are making efforts to recruit other minority groups. It is difficult though, and so we are doing the best we can to diversify our staff. Hopefully, Joey, that answers your question.
And Shelley, let me just add just a little bit to that. One of the things that we changed when it came to our values for the police department, we included a diversity and inclusion value for the Vallejo Police Department. And I believe that that's really important because we do want a police force that is reflective of our community. The other thing that I did when I first started was hire 2 extra help recruiters. They were police officers that had done recruitment, and they were knowledgeable, very skilled at doing recruitment. And they helped us, they're helping us to attract and retain quality employees, and they're doing an exceptional job. The other thing that we did was we now include the members of our community on our hiring panels. And so the members like Brian Farrell and other folks are involved in actually listening to the applicants that come in now. And everyone's, if you are interested, can volunteer to do this, but you listen, our public listens to the applicants and actually give them scores. And that's really important for us because it shouldn't just be the police department listening to these wonderful applicants that we have applying, but it should be our community. And now you are participating in that process. And that's really important, not only for recruitment, but for the promotional process as well.
Thank you, Chief. David Haldane.
Thank you, Chief. I think what I've heard a lot of and felt a lot of tonight is that we feel an us and them mentality with our police force. And I think both sides can agree that that's not necessarily the most productive environment or the best feeling environment to be in. And we all want to move forward. In that vein, thank you very much for this event. This is a great first step. I'm encouraged by seeing this, and I'm looking forward to seeing more events like it. In order to understand people that we want to understand the perspective of, work with, and trust, it's important to understand their mindset. In that vein, I'm wondering if there's any way we can find a list of the trainings your officers have on an ongoing basis or anything coming up in the future, some sort of list so we could understand what your officers are trained to do and how we can best interact with them and their mindset when we meet them in the field.
Excellent question, David. One of the things that we have on our website, if you go to our website, is actually a list of the training and the hours that the officers are required to have. So that's available now online.
Thank you, Chief. It's now 7:43 and we do want to wrap up at 8 p.m. So I have 3 hands raised. Liat Meitzenheimer, you're next.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to hear this policy. My concern is that not everybody does Facebook. Not everybody is tuned in to how this is rolling out to the community, and it's good that they're going to have a session at the Philam Community Center. But what's the plan for rolling this out to other parts of the community? Because not everybody has access to internet. I'm hoping that with COVID that we're going to be able to have actual live meetings at some point where people can come that are not don't have access to internet. One of the growing groups of people that I am now a part of is the senior citizens group. Not all seniors know how to do Zoom. Not all seniors know how to operate the computer to be able to participate in this. And so I know there are people that would like to hear about this information and be able to interact and respond. But just when they hear after the fact that the meeting happened, and the question is, how come I didn't hear anything about it? So I think we need to do a better job of publicizing this information, and then with the outreach that we're going actually out into the communities instead of expecting the community to come to City Hall to hear this information. And so my question is there what's the plan to roll this out? Are there going to be more meetings that are going to be in different parts of the community that give people more access?
That is a fantastic question. I don't know if Captain Potts wants to talk about that. I can answer it for you.
Go ahead, Chief, you got it.
So the question is, what's our plan on rolling out more of these town hall meetings and to different groups in the future?
I'll also jump in. We're doing a coffee with the cops, and I know you're planning some of those. We're doing one in South Vallejo at the end of March. And I think you're trying to get those back up and running again.
Yeah, same with neighborhood watch meetings as well. Coffee with the cop. Thank you for that, Pastor Harris. Also in the past, I love what Leon said, we need to reach out to other communities such as even the deaf community and folks that aren't always heard. And we've done that in the past. So I think moving forward, COVID's precluded that from us, but we definitely want to do that with different segments of the community.
So one of the plans is that we're going to have town hall meetings. We had 4 scheduled, just town hall meetings for the year. And we're also going to have other meetings in terms of outreach regarding different policies, this policy. I think Philip Wilson is, I don't know if he's still involved with the senior center there, but we talked about this at our Chiefs Advisory Board, going to the senior center there to do presentations. And I think when I first pre-COVID, about 2 years ago, there was about 100 and so odd people that showed up for a meeting there. So I'd love to have a meeting like that so we can have a discussion with our seniors, so we can have these robust discussions like we're having now.
And Leon, and for the rest of the crew, we have discussed different meetings throughout the year. We have some dates established. We need to firm those up, but we will be going again out to the public so that they don't have to come to us.
Okay, but my question was more specific to this policy change and informing the public about the use of force policy change and what's the plan for doing outreach on that.
I can answer that, Chief. So Leah, we are planning another, and I think this question came up a few questions earlier, but we are planning another town hall meeting to talk about this same policy. So what I'm hearing is we need to maybe do a flyer campaign for folks that don't have internet and post, like physically post a flyer somewhere where folks know where the next meeting is, what time it is, what the location is, and what the discussion will be about. So we do have that date. I think it's the last Wednesday in the month, next month. Same hours, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And so I do think that this meeting will be in person, physical. So I'm optimistic that we're going to get a lot more people showing up, because I think a lot of people, including our staff, really want to go back to physical meetings. We lose a little bit with Zoom, and to your point, not everybody is really familiar with how to operate Zoom. And so I agree with you. We want to have more discussions about this policy. We're going to be talking about other very important policies in the future. And so we value your input here as well as future input on how we can do a better job reaching folks and talking about very important topics.
Thank you, DC Talk. Melissa Swift, you're next.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Chief Williams, I wanted to return to the topic of the bent badges. Recently, your PIO, Brittany Jackson, issued a press release that the bent badges report was ready, but blocked by the city attorney's office. So I'd like to know, what are you and Mike Malone doing to get this report to the community?
Thank you, Melissa. Like I've said, this is an ongoing personnel issue, and we cannot discuss this personnel matter.
Judy Thomas, you're next, and this would be our last question, and then Chief Williams, if you could.
But I'm sorry, I just was curious about the report. What are you doing to have it released? Because she said that it was ready in September, but it's being blocked by the city attorney's office. I understand that you're saying it's a personnel matter, but we're just talking about the release of the report.
Again, Melissa, it is ongoing personnel matter. If you do have a follow-up question, you can refer that to the city attorney.
Well, it's your.
Melissa, you heard what he said. Shelley, you will call on the next person.
If we can just.
Thomas, you have the floor.
Yes, if we can just please continue to address the topic on hand, the use of force, please.
Ms. Judy Thomas.
Yes, I have two questions for you. My first question has to do with, do we have any mental health crisis workers on full-time staff? And then I'd also like an update on the 2030 program that Captain Potts mentioned in our breakout section.
Captain Potts, you want to talk about 30 by 30 and I'll talk about mental health?
Sure, yes. So 30 by 30 is a national initiative. So by 2030, we want to try to get 30% of women representation in policing. And so again, it started back east and we're one of the first agencies as an early adopter. Unfortunately, we're not doing so well. You know, we've lost some female officers to attrition, but we're being intentional in our recruiting efforts, as the chief mentioned earlier, and we're doing our best to get those numbers back up. So nationally, the numbers for women in policing have hovered around 10 to 15%. And, you know, we obviously need to get that higher. So again, that's us being intentional about it and latching on to this initiative. So, Chief.
And Judy, I think you mentioned mental health. So we don't currently have a mental health team. We're looking at developing a mental health response team. We did receive $900,000 from Congressman Thompson to get a mental health response team started in the city of Vallejo. So we're currently meeting with a consultant to develop a program for our city. But we do have Solano County Uplift, and that's a countywide mental health response team for the county. And we are currently utilizing them as a resource in the city of Vallejo. But we are excited about starting our own mental health response team for the city of Vallejo.
Thank you, Chief. Still 7:53. We have time for one more question and then closing remarks from Chief Williams. John Pianka. Okay, moving to the final question. I guess John has lost connection. Stacy Martinez, please. You have the floor.
Hi, thank you so much. The person who brought up the mental health training, are you aware, Chief, about SB 882? That's currently making its way through the California legislation. It creates an advisory council to the Attorney General's office to specifically for training for law enforcement interactions for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I think mental health may be included in that bill as well. And it would include an advisory council that would review best practices for training purposes for law enforcement for those populations. So that may be a resource.
Thank you, Stacy. One of our commitments has always been to properly train our officers in crisis intervention training. I believe personally that our officers should have at least 40 hours of that training, if not the advanced training in CIT. But also being responsive to people that are suffering a mental health crisis is a priority for us. And so we do have an emphasis within our police department on trauma-informed care, and we should have a system that focuses on providing the best care for those that are suffering a mental health crisis or any crisis. And so that is one of our priorities for our police department.
Very good. So out of respect for everyone's time, I thank you for your attention this evening. I hope you found this discussion uplifting, hopeful, and moving us in the right direction. I'd like to thank especially all of our volunteers who have given their time and attention to facilitating and acting as scribes. We cannot do this without you behind us and in front of us showing the way. For all the participants who have made comments and had good suggestions, brought new ideas and concerns forward, We so appreciate that as well. It's with honor and gratitude that I would like to turn this meeting over to Shawnee Williams, Chief Shawnee Williams, to give us our closing remarks.
Shelley, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all the volunteers that have helped produce this today. We really appreciate the feedback, the input that we received from our community, from all the participants tonight. And I can't overemphasize that enough. We are very grateful and thankful for your participation tonight. And we look forward to the next meeting, which should be in person on the 30th. And we look forward to seeing you there. So thank you very much again. This was a very valuable experience for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Grateful.
Thank you, everyone.
All
Have a
right.
good
And
day. Have a great evening. Thank you all for showing up.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Gracias.